Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us. We're proud to present our next speaker, Jen Andre with Rapid7. Please give her a warm welcome.
Hey everybody, can you hear me? I hope so. Awesome. Let's click this forward. So my name is Jen. I'm with Rapid7. We are a cybersecurity solutions company, and I run the orchestration and automation team at Rapid7. And I'm here to talk to you about security orchestration and automation. Some of you are probably familiar with these words, or you've heard these words in the context of other solutions, like DevOps, for example, and orchestrating and automating deployments. But I'm here to talk to you about why there's a huge need in security to start adopting some of these practices. So, why is security operations in need of help with orchestration automation? If you work in security, or you have friends who do, a lot of these problems might be familiar to you. There's too much work for your teams to do, given the resources that that team has and the challenges that they have. Obviously aware of the increasing number of threats that are out there. And I think one challenge as well is that the security team, even when you resource it, it doesn't really accomplish a lot of its tasks on its own, and it has to overcome the operational silos within an organization to actually do its job effectively. So if you look at just the idea of investing in security, I think many companies recognize that there is a need to invest more. You might think that this is a problem that can be solved, or the security operations problem can be solved just by hiring more people. And that's really not the case. It's actually really, really hard to hire people in cybersecurity. I try to do it all the time. There's a close to 0% unemployment rate overall, and this is just getting wider and wider as needs continue to grow. You can see here, Forrest and Sullivan estimates that there's going to be a 1.8 million people shortage. That's how much headcount that we're going to have to try to fill over the next few years. And again, we can't solve the amount of work we have to do just with hiring and filling seats with bodies. It's too hard. A lot of the work that's being created for cybersecurity teams is just an artifact of where we are today versus where we were 10 or 15 years ago. Obviously there's more threats that are out there. The internet's becoming a big thing, as we all know. But our environments have gotten way more complex. If you think about, again, where we were 10 or 15 years ago to today, security teams have to deal with these complex environments that include things like cloud and SaaS and IoT and mobile devices, and they're responsible for protecting it all. And what they try to do, obviously, they're assessing the needs of the business, the various threats that are out there, the technologies that are being adopted by the business, and they try to buy security products and tools to help fill the gaps and address those threats. But what this creates is this very disparate ecosystem, a lot of fragmentation. Security teams, like other teams, want to buy the best tools for the jobs, and those tools often don't play together. And what that creates is, number one, like a ton of alerts and alarms. So all of these things are trying to do their job in terms of detecting or protecting. That creates work for the security team to have to dig through, and takes them away from other high-value tasks that human beings should be good at. So if you hired someone for threat modeling or helping build and manage a vulnerability management program, if they're just sitting there logging into 3 or 4 different systems and manually investigating alarms and stuff that comes in, that's taking away from time to do those other important things that they have to do to protect the business. And again, another artifact of all of these tools are the manual processes that just evolve over time as you acquire all of these different tools and technologies. I think it's not something that people plan for, but again, as you introduce some new aspect to your system, you oftentimes introduce more work for the security person because that's another thing that they have to log into, take another action on. And even though it's providing value, it's actually creating more work for the security team. And look at that. It's people working across different tools, a lot of animations. And finally, again, like, I think we might be familiar with ops teams effectively using orchestration automation tools. And you know, the ops teams, they have their job, and they want to do their job very effectively. The engineering teams want to do their jobs effectively, and they're focused on their work. And the security team wants to as well, but oftentimes for the security team to have an effective security program, they need to use and work well with those other teams to be able to execute on that program. So one example of a process that a lot of companies are familiar with might be vulnerability management. So security teams like to, or think it prudent to buy vulnerability scanning solutions so that they can actually scan their various assets and applications and identify vulnerabilities. And this is important because we probably have heard of a few breaches that were simply traced back to known vulnerabilities not being patched in a timely fashion. So the security team uses these tools to become aware of these vulnerabilities, and they run the scans, they get this huge report, and it has a ton of different stuff in it. They can't just hand that report over to IT, because IT has to patch this stuff, right? They don't want to risk making IT an enemy of theirs by giving them all of this work, and they want to be able to apply the patches in a measured manner that reduces risks. So they have to go through the report, identify what's of high value to patch first, what's low risk to patch first, which vulnerabilities are more important, and work with the IT team to break down that report into work for them to do. They might go ahead and create tickets for them. The ticket gets assigned to someone. IT identifies the patches that are needed and queues it up in their patching system. And then from there, the patches get applied, and then the ticket gets closed, and then the security team maybe goes ahead and runs another scan to verify that the vulnerability was actually patched. Again, not really hard work for each team member to do, but if you're doing that over and over again, and you probably should be, because this isn't something you do like once a quarter, you should be patching frequently, it can really add up in terms of time and energy that it takes from your security team. And when you look at a process like that, I think like the idea is like, look, like we have a bunch of people coordinating work or orchestrating work across a variety of different tools and teams. They're doing this work manually. We should automate it. I don't think that's necessarily like a unique insight, but it's actually really, really hard for security teams to automate their processes for a number of reasons. If you look at just a lot of these processes, right? Even though a lot of security teams deal with the same sort of threats and have similar processes, their environments are slightly different. So, I might patch with BigFix, another team might patch with SCCM, I might prioritize different patches depending on my business's risks. So that means if I build a Python script, or someone on my security team does, I can't take that script and give it to my buddy and have them be able to use that automation effectively in their organization. So what happens is that orgs tend to look to building custom automation for their business processes just because they have to, and that takes a ton of time. It takes specialized resources, so you need to have security programming skills within your engineering team. And again, the best person to hire for threat modeling or vulnerability management might not have those skills. So you either have to give them the time and space to learn them, or you have to go and try to find resources elsewhere. So automating things is actually really hard for a lot of security teams. That said, it's not impossible, and there's technologies you can use and approach you can use to approach automation successfully. So I think the first thing to recognize when you're looking at automation as a potential solution for some of the problems in your security organization is to really identify automation as a solution, right? Automation isn't going to solve every single problem in your organization, but here are some key indicators that automation could help. If you are examining your team and their processes and how they work, and they are spending a ton of time manually information gathering, creating tickets, doing other communications, and they're getting burnt out from that because that work can be very, very repetitive, and it can take a lot of mental energy if you do it over and over again, then you might have a problem that automation can solve. And once you identify, okay, look, I think we need to start automating some of this work, there could be value in that, the first thing you really want to do is understand your people and processes and tools. Don't just dive into scripting things, because in my experience, like a lot of organizations that do this, they end up hitting roadblocks and they aren't successful. And it's actually surprisingly difficult in a lot of cases to understand what to automate and why. When you start to acquire these tools and technologies and build these processes ad hoc, you might not have processes that are documented. You might have team members that do things slightly differently, and you want to consolidate not just on how people do things today, but what the end state should be and what the goal should be when it comes to automation. And you have to understand your people and their needs. And again, it's easy for me as a manager of a security team to talk to my team members and understand their pain points and how they work. But you also have to work with your peers in IT and engineering and ops and understand where they have pain as well, because you can use automation to actually make them advocates. And like I said before, understand your talents, right? If you have software engineering skills in your team, that's awesome. You should take advantage of them to build these automations. But a lot of teams don't, and you have to think about how you apply your resources in a smart way, right? If you really need that vulnerability management program built or that threat modeling on your application done, you can use tools like security orchestration automation tools to make the process of automation easier, so that your team doesn't have to figure out all of these different APIs for all the tools that they use and learn a ton about programming. And another important thing is to really understand the tools that you use in your process. If you really have an ambitious idea around automating something, but there's no API behind that tool, maybe it's a legacy tool, you need to put a plan together before you begin the automation to work with the vendor to get an API in place, or maybe even think internally about how you have a transition plan to use a vendor that's going to support the automation that you need to get the efficiency gains you actually want. And finally, again, you want to understand and map your processes end to end, right? There's a lot of potential use cases when it comes to automating security processes within a security team. And like the actual process itself and the tools that you use, the use cases that may be of high value for you to automate can differ from organization to organization. So going through and understanding what your teams spend their time on is super important. If I'm an organization that deals with a ton of phishing threats, it's a huge manual process that my team has to do 5 or 6 times a day, that might be a good candidate for me to actually initially target for automation. If I spend a ton of time patching and my tools support automation and the organization is on board with automating some of that process, then patching may be a good place for me to start. But again, if you look across the stack at a lot of these processes, there's opportunity for automation across almost all of them, and it really depends on your organization. Once you've laid out the process end to end and really understood all of the steps that team members are trying to accomplish manually, and what tools they're using and how much time they're spending on using those tools, you can really understand your efficiency gains and where to actually apply automation to get those initial wins, right? You don't want to boil the ocean and try to come up with this really fancy automated patching process that tries to automate everything, because you won't be successful doing that right away. You should actually, when you're looking at security automation in general, look at areas where you can get high value that are low risk, right? Because like any sort of process or initiative, you want to be able to show wins to be able to continue investing in it. So if you could even save a few minutes of time by automating certain steps of a process, that's actually a better approach than trying to go in with a plan to do this fully fancy automation that may accidentally turn off your CEO's account during an incident response process. And finally, you want to use tooling that's going to accelerate automation to fill in those gaps. Again, like if you have the tools in-house to actually build the automations yourself and maintain them, that's fine. But there are solutions out there, like Rapid7's Insight Connect, that actually help security teams automate things without having to dig into a ton of APIs, without having to learn a lot of code and build like a whole service around it. We provide a lot of the infrastructure for you and your security team, not just to build automations, but also to maintain them as well. Because the final point I want to make is that automation isn't something a team just does once. Like other security tools, you just buy it and just set it and forget it, or you just build an automation and expect it to work flawlessly forever, then you're not really doing it the right way. You want to, as I said earlier, start by automating work that is of high value. Start more conservatively. Maybe bring in more human beings than you would in an ideal end state. And you want to review that automation over time to see where you can continue to optimize it. It's important to do that, not only because you'll gain more value from your automation, but also because processes evolve, right? Businesses are going to start using different tools. You want to make sure that you're using the right tools to address the threats that you're trying to address. You want to make sure that your automation evolves with the threats that are out there effectively. So that's my final point. And in conclusion, you need to understand your people and processes and tools before you really can effectively automate them. If you don't do that, and this is where I've seen customers fail, like they don't really understand the process that they want to automate, and the other team members that they're working with don't really support automation. You need to have all of that in line before you can begin automation. You want to target high-value processes to achieve the best ROI. If you go through a process to automate something that you really only do once a quarter or once every 6 months, and it only saves you a few hours every year, that's probably not the best process to actually approach automation, because you're going to actually invest some time planning and implementing the automation, so you want to choose high-value processes. You want to use tools to accelerate your time to value when it comes to orchestration automation. Again, like there's no reason to necessarily rebuild everything. If you can use tools that help you get to automation quicker, help you use your existing investments in terms of talent to actually build your security automation. And finally, you want to start small and constantly evolve your automation. Build that evolution into your security program, and the time that you spend doing that should pay for itself in terms of the ROI of what you get out of that automation. And I think that's my talk. Thank you. It's a survey. Oh, and if you want to know more, you can actually see a demo at Rapid7. The booth is 707, I believe. It's over there.